afternoon. Welcome back to the Education Jurisdiction Summit. I hope you all had a great lunch break. We have a special guest joining us who's not in the agenda today, who'd like to give a few remarks to the participants and to the event. I'd like you to welcome Grant Chief Derek Fox. Grant Chief.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Jocelyn. Good afternoon, everyone. Don't mind my voice. I had COVID twice, I think, during the Christmas holidays and then in January, and I think I've been battling that long-term effects of it. But overall, my health's been good, and I hope your health has been good also. To the many of you attending and listening, to all you educators out there, I just wanted to provide some support, some insight, and of course listen while I can, while I'm here in the office. I do have a 2 o'clock meeting that I'll need to step off for, but I want to first of all acknowledge the prayer that was done this morning, and acknowledge our elders, our people, our leadership, and the many of you who take the time to instill your passion in the education system, the education of our young ones, and our overall lifelong journey of learning. I myself, I'm learning. I'm still learning as the Grand Chief, and this is my 7th year in leadership with Anishinaabe Nation. I did 2 terms, 6 years as a Deputy Grand Chief. And in that time, I carried the education portfolio, education jurisdiction, education, and youth, and many others. But I mentioned those 2 because I find that education and youth are very related. I know everything is related when we talk about NAN and our territory and the many things that we see in our daily lives, education, infrastructure, the health system, everything that we are trying to bring to our communities. But I know that education and youth for me has been my passion. And I say that because our young people are our future. And we always say that, and they really are our future. They are the foundation to my leadership as a Grand Chief and our leadership as the executive. As you know, there's 3 deputies. You would have heard Bobby Narcisse speaking this morning. And our vision for NAN, it goes well beyond my time as a Grand Chief. I don't know if I'll be here for. I know I'll be here for the next 2.5 years. What happens after that, I'm not sure. But I know that our vision goes well beyond that timeline. That we are putting in the work today to ensure we are doing our part to make a better future for our young people. And we always talk about governance. We always talk about treaty, jurisdiction, control of our territory. And one day, and I repeat this over and over and over again, one day that we're going to see our own education system, our own education boards, our own hospitals, our own policing system, control of our water, our infrastructure, not so dependent or reliant on others, but that our First Nations communities will be dependent on themselves, and that they'll have the say in everything from education to their roads, to their homelands, and even our languages. And I say languages because our jurisdiction and our governance and that control of our territory is going to require that we always say land, culture, and language makes up a nation, and we're very distinct, and we're very unique when it comes to our territory. We're very remote. There's no place in Canada like us, and so the land is extremely important. Our culture, we got 4 tribes. We got Algonquins, we got Ojibways, we got Crees, we got Ojibways. And then our language. Our language is, I think our language is going to be a big part of this education jurisdiction and the work in education. You know, language is so crucial to the spirit of a person, you know, to the growth of a person, to the pride of a person, especially the young people of our nation. Many of them, I know that they want to be able to speak the language. So how do we do this through education, through the work, through jurisdiction? You know, how do we, you know, I believe that leadership is going to be through linguists even, you know. How does a young person learn the language when they're not around it every day? You know, it's how do they take that time to have that, instill that language in them, and if they don't have access to it, how are they going to learn the language, right? How are they going to learn Cree, Oji Cree, and Ojibwe? You know, those are the things that we need to start thinking about, you know, because one day, and this is a part of our vision, is that we want to see leaders who are not speaking like I am today in English to our people. You know, we want to see them speaking in their language. You know, and we want to see people who are educated in their ways, but educated in ways that they can provide for themselves too, for their families. You know, lawyers and doctors and pilots and engineers and you know, all those things that we want to see our young people do. But language, that is so crucial. That's huge for myself. I have to admit, and I say this to my father. I called him last night, and we were talking about the language and how many of our young people lost it, right? And even people of my generation. And there comes a point in time where we need to stop blaming our parents or what may have happened to our people and through residential school. Or that was very bad stuff, we know, but at some point in time, as leaders, we need to take it upon ourselves to take control of our own willingness to learn these things. So that is something that we want to instill in our next generation of educators, leaders, and decolonize in a way. You know, that's the vision that I have as the Grand Chief, is that one day, you know, I hope I'm still alive and I get to see that day when you know, many of our people start to, I'm not saying everyone's colonized, but I know for myself, I grew up in a world that English was the first language, that sitting in a classroom was what was the way I was taught. You know, I grew up in Thunder Bay since grade 1 and on. So that's the way I was taught. That was my environment. I'm a product of my environment. But that education, that's what I learned. So it was only in my later years that I started to take my culture back, and that my father would send me up to stay with my grandparents, probably to get rid of me, but I'd go up there for the summer to spend time with them, right? And that's where I started to understand things like even little simple things like rabbit snaring and setting nets and spending time on the river. And my grandparents couldn't speak English, and that was what I loved. That was like the spirit in me was reignited, because as a young person, I was very, very confused on who I was as a First Nations person, growing up in a very racist city. And I'm not afraid to say that, because I experienced a lot of racism at Thunder Bay. So, you know, being a First Nations person, I often ask myself, what you know, who am I, and how do I become proud of myself as a person of red or brown skin, however you want to say it, person from the north. And it was only going back to the north that I found that identity, right? And I share this because many of our young people, or not just our young people, but those in the education system, are enduring the same. So I think it has a large part to do with, you know, we have a high rate of social issues. We have a high rate of suicide, addiction issues, opioids, drug epidemics. There's a lot of things happening in our communities. And this morning I was meeting with tribal councils. I've started this meeting with tribal council leaders and directors and people that work within the tribal council system. and they've been talking a lot about what's going on in their communities, and they talked about, one of the things they talked about was the potential development coming up, all season roads opening up the north, right? And that's something that some of the community wants. So that's something we need to be prepared for. Is that something that our communities are ready for? Is what they asked me, and I said, that's a good question. That's going to be up to the communities to answer. So, that's my long-winded. I said I'd only need 2 minutes, and that's my long-winded 2 minutes. But education jurisdiction. I know that we're trying to sign that agreement. That was I think it was 25 years ago. My father was Grand Chief in I believe it was 1994 to 2000. And when he took on the term in 1994, he was first year as Grand Chief. He signed that education work. And I know Grand Chief Fiddler had some influence there a few years ago, and now we're hoping to get the final agreement done, hopefully within my term, but if not, soon. So I just wanted to share that with all you educators, and thank you all for all your hard work. I know it's going to be a challenge to get the work done. I know that we're still in the sixth wave now of COVID. And I hope that we can get through this safely, that no lives are lost, and that we continue the good work. Myself and my relationship with the federal government is very strong. We've been working with Patty Haidu on many issues, education being one of them. And she's very well aware of the work that needs to be done, and will continue to advocate on the many issues that involve education jurisdiction, and of course the province too, and the many partners that we have out there. And we appreciate the partners, the school boards, and of course the educators that take the time to spend time with our community members and ensure that this is done right. And we want to get it done right. I know there's an elder within NAN. I'm not sure if he's on, Barney Batiste. He always says, I think it's build it right or do it right. I don't want to misquote him, but we need to work hard. We need to work together and united and do it right, build it right. And I look forward to seeing the many of you once these restrictions are lifted, and addressing you all in person. So thank you for allowing me the time to speak here, and miigwech.
Miigwech, Grand Chief Fox. As always, your words on education are hopeful and inspiring, especially sharing your journey with education and the journey that you hope to see our future students take. Miigwech. I'd like to move into our next session. Our presenter is the presentation is an update and overview on education jurisdiction. We have Derek Chum as our presenter. Just a quick introduction on Derek. He's our lead negotiator on behalf of NAN for the education jurisdiction negotiations with Canada. He was a practicing lawyer for many years and worked with Indigenous clients and communities. He was a corporate and commercial lawyer providing business and project advice to Indigenous enterprises across Ontario. He serves on the board of the Moose Cree Group of Companies, the business arm of the Moose Cree First Nation, which provides employment and opportunity for Moose Cree members through its various business ventures. He's also on the board for Nizwe Biik Development Corporation, which provides affordable housing for Indigenous people in Toronto. Derek served on the board and was chair of Five Nations Energy Incorporated, the first Indigenous owned and operated transmission line in Ontario. Derek was also the president/CEO of Miskodim Corporation, which structured the Indigenous contracting opportunities for the $2.5 billion Lower Matagami River project, a partnership between Moose Cree First Nation and Ontario Power Generation. His recent leadership role as the Vice President of Indigenous Relations at Hydro One involved a range of responsibilities, from developing and implementing Indigenous relations strategies and negotiations with First Nation communities. With that said, I'd like to pass the mic over to Derek. Derek?
All right, thank you, Joss, for the introduction. That was good, and thank you, Grand Chief Fox and Deputy Grand Chief Narcisse and the Elder for the opening remarks as well. Also want to thank Jonathan Kaganich for the panel presentation from this morning. I thought it was a very good setup for what we're going to talk about this afternoon, including some of the items I'm going to touch on here. I just want to I want to take this time, I've got about 20 minutes here, to talk a bit about where we are at with the education jurisdiction discussions, negotiations with Canada, and what the next steps look like. So, and I'll touch on again some of the things that were said earlier today. So education jurisdiction, what does that mean practically? Well, it means having Canada recognizing First Nations jurisdiction. It means First Nations taking control of education in their communities. It means them filling the void left by the Indian Act and enacting laws that will govern education in their communities. So again, we heard Matthew Angies talk earlier this morning about this process means leaving the Indian Act behind, and how the Indian Act will no longer apply for those communities who vote to accept the education agreement and have their jurisdiction recognized by Canada. So, it raises the question, well, what's going to replace the Indian Act? So we take the Indian Act out, what happens then? Well, with the education agreement, a new First Nation controlled education system will be created, and it will function without federal government involvement, except of course for funding. The feds will still be on the hook for funding the system, but there won't be much involvement otherwise from the feds. It's going to be First Nation controlled. So First Nations will govern the system. First Nations will continue to deliver local education in their communities. So this education agreement that we're negotiating, it's based upon an agreement in principle finalized in 2018. And we are in the middle of negotiating it with Canada, this final agreement. And I should stress that we do not yet have this final agreement with Canada as yet. It is still in the process of being negotiated. But we are basing our discussions on the agreement in principle finalized in 2018. So that is our mandate, what is contained in the agreement in principle from 2018. I'll talk a bit about the progress of the negotiations just now. When I talk about this, I like to talk about it being in two parts. There's the agreements themselves with Canada, and then there's the community engagement side. We've had good progress on the agreement side, I would suggest, not as good on the community engagement side. We heard some of this again this morning from the panel led by Jonathan. So basically, we're looking at two types of an agreements and a plan with Canada. The first agreement is the education agreement. And I started with NAN as a lead negotiator in August 2020. And have to say that we've made some pretty good progress in that time. We were able to get drafts of each chapter of the agreement. And again, nothing is finalized here, but some chapters are more advanced than others. So we still have a few outstanding items to work through. A big item I would suggest that we need to work through, and again, this was brought up this morning, is the governance of the education system. We're creating under this agreement a body that we're calling in the agreement the territory-wide education body, and that has an oversight function in terms of setting standards for education, in terms of curriculum standards and standards for operations of schools. It is also the vehicle that will provide funding to the schools in each community. So we are working within the boundaries of the AIP, but there is still a lot of detail to be filled out here. And we can only fill out that detail with guidance from the participating First Nations. So your communities, right? If your communities are going to participate in this, we need their involvement. We need to talk to them. We need to hear from them about what their ideas are around what this territory-wide education body will look like and what it will do. We have the broad strokes painted out just now, but we need to really drill down into detail. And I'll get into the engagement side in a little bit here. So that's one element, is the education agreement. The other piece is very important as well, and that's the physical agreement. that is the agreement that will fund the education system in your community and across the system. So we're working on right now in a framework with Canada and other Indigenous groups that will be applied to our fiscal agreement. Now, the fiscal agreement will be for costs, like I said, related to running your schools and programs for primary and secondary education in your communities. The fiscal agreement will also supply funding for the territory-wide education body to run itself. It will, and I have to be clear that funding for the territory-wide education body will not come at the expense of education dollars meant for each community. It will be a separate pool of money specifically for the cost to operate the territory-wide education body. Again, the schools in your communities will not be worse off by virtue of joining this new education system. The third track here with Canada is the implementation plan. So, we are negotiating, like I said, the education agreement. So that's one thing, but it's quite another to implement. So we will begin developing with Canada an implementation plan in the coming months. And this is going to detail how the education agreement will be implemented. So along with that, again, is understanding what does the territory-wide body look like? How is it governed? How is your community represented in that organization? And how will it develop its standards and policies that will apply to your schools? So this is the level of detail that we need to drill down into, and we haven't had that opportunity. Community engagement, like I said, has been slower than we would like, but it's a reflection of where the world is right now with COVID mainly being the biggest factor, I would suggest, that has slowed this down. So community engagement, it's required. We need to ensure that your community members, your educators, and your elected leaders understand what's in the education agreement, understand how it affects education in your communities and what it means for the kids in your communities. For example, one of the requirements will be, again, we're coming out of the Indian Act, so we can't have a vacuum, right? We need something to replace that. So we're going to replace that with local education laws that will apply across the territory-wide system. So this is where your community will need to develop its own education code. So in the community engagement process, that is something that your community will need to come to understand. NAN will be there to provide supports to help you develop your own education law, your own education code, which will be, in fact, an education law. And that will set out how the schools and education services will be delivered in your community and how the schools will interact with the territory-wide education body. So it's an important document for your community, and it's important to have in order to participate in the system. So like I say, engagement to date has been slow, largely due to COVID. The NAN team has not been able to visit communities and have face-to-face meetings, which I personally find to be much more interesting, much more compelling, and better for building relationships and trust around this system that we are trying to develop here. So another reason it's important is that your members need to understand, again, this agreement, because ultimately they're going to hold a vote on whether to accept this education agreement. They're going to have to hold a vote to pass their local education code, which is required to enter into the new system. So again, I can't say it enough that it's essential for your leadership, your educators, your community members to understand the education agreement and the system it will create. I'm going to run through a very, very quick presentation. I just want to leave with some other thoughts as well. So I am going to share my screen here if I can. And what I want to show you is a slide that shows what this system, will look like in broad strokes. So on the left side here, we've got the current sort of government Canada education program. We have Canada that delivers money to each First Nation individually, one-on-one, by and large. And the First Nation takes that money and operates its school and its education programs. And the school then purchases whatever second level services it can it needs or can afford. And then what we're doing is looking to transition to the situation here on the right. So this is what we are working towards, a territory-wide education system that is controlled by First Nations. Again, we see Canada here providing the money, but that is about it. The money goes to the territory-wide education body, which has a relationship with the schools, and it will deliver funding to each of the schools. It is also there, like I say, to set standards that will apply to the schools in terms of curriculum, setting literacy standards, numeracy standards, etc. It will also set out standards for the operation of schools, and it can also be a very useful support function to all the schools in the territory. You can imagine that as a centralized body, it will have interactions with all the schools that participate here. So that's a lot of information that it will gather, and it can also share with other schools. So it has an important support function too. And in addition, second level services will still be available for schools to purchase as they need. So that those won't go anywhere. So that's sort of a rough sketch as to where we are today to where we want to go. So I hope that gives you a sense of what this can look like. I want to, oh, sorry, I'm getting some noise on my mic. Okay, I want to go through a quick PowerPoint presentation here and leave you folks with some questions. There's a lot of history here that I'm not going to get into. So again, this is an overview of some of the history, the education laws, the governance, and next steps in the process. So as we heard earlier, this process has been underway for quite some time, going back to 1999. We're in 2022, so do the math. That's a long time for this to be underway. We are, 2018 was the agreement in principle. Like I said, we are building on that today to work towards an agreement with Canada. And then once we get an agreement, we move into implementation. So again, 1999 talks about the framework agreement. I don't want to get into too much history here because there's not much we can do about that. I really want to talk about where we are today and where we're going. So 2018, we saw the agreement in principle. Pre-implementation refers to, again, here we are, engagement with communities to guide development of laws and agreements to create the new standards, policies, et cetera, for the education system. This is sort of the process we're in now. I'd like to be further into it in terms of engagement with communities, because all of this information will help us, it will inform what the territory-wide education body will look like. Community ratification, I talked about this. Communities will ratify the education agreement and their local education code. So again, education of your members is important. For educators, it might be this information might be old news for you and very simple to understand. If you've been working with it for a while. However, for your members, that probably is not the case. It is quite complex, as we heard from some of the presenters this morning. So again, the implementation will see the transfer from the Indian Act system to the territory-wide system. Again, picture that slide I put up earlier. Education laws. Okay, so again, having jurisdiction means having the ability to make laws. So we're going to have First Nations who can make laws to govern local education in their communities. We're going to have the territory-wide education body. It will make laws applicable to the system as a whole. And I'm going to talk more about that tomorrow and some of the things about the TWAB tomorrow in a presentation in the afternoon. So I know I'm going quick, but we will circle back tomorrow to discuss this. And again, education laws generally here. I want to get to sort of next steps. So again, I talked about these 3 items here, the education agreement, physical transfer agreement, implementation plan. Those are moving forward. Governance. Here's an important thing, and this is why we need to get to community engagement. We need to understand how it will be run. We've got a body in mind that the agreement will create this body that will have oversight of the system. We need to drill down on the functions and how that's going to work, and we need input. And another thing to emphasize here that this territory-wide education system is not going to be run by NAN. NAN is facilitating the negotiation of this with Canada. It's up, communities will be running this at the end of the day once it's up and running. First level, this system talks about 3 levels: first level, second level, third level. First level refers to First Nations, your communities, continuing to have responsibility for local education. They'll have their local education authorities or boards or committees, however it's structured, that will be in charge of managing their schools. And importantly too, the local PFNs, participating First Nations, will choose how to develop culturally appropriate programs like land-based learning and program learning. That's in the hands of local communities. Okay, I'm having trouble here with my, here we go. Second level, they will continue support services. They'll continue to be available to First Nation schools, and they're available to be purchased as they are today. That will remain the same. Third level is the territory-wide education body. Again, there to set standards, and that will apply to all the schools. Next steps, this is what I want to get into here. So negotiations with Canada continue. More engagement will be required. Again, we need your communities to understand what this is about. There will be a vote at the end. To facilitate that, NAN does have funding available to hire folks in your community to assist with engagement and to ensure your community is ready for the ratification vote on the education agreement and the local education code. I know this is not going to happen tomorrow, but these are steps we need to begin working towards. And we'd like to get into your communities sooner than later to begin this type of engagement. NAN has resources to hire community to work with your leaders and educators to assist you in getting the message out. I would ask you contact Jocelyn about further information on that. And sort of looking forward as well, we're going to need data sharing agreements with your schools so that we can understand what your needs are. In addition to hearing from you what your needs are, we need to share actual data as well, so that we can be sure that we're getting appropriate funding for your schools to continue to function and grow to accommodate some of the new, hopefully, new education and cultural programming. And we need to work with your educators and leadership to develop your local education codes, et cetera, and on how the TWEB should be governed. So I realize that was quick, fast, but like I said, we're going to revisit some of these things, and we're going to hear about this afternoon from a panel that have gone through this process of obtaining or having their education jurisdiction recognized. We've got a group out of Central Ontario joining us, the KEB, and then another group out of Nova Scotia joining us this afternoon. So we'll hear about some of their challenges, some of their stories on their road to jurisdiction, and hopefully some of this will help you understand what the NAN path and what your community's path looks like going forward. So with that, Joss, that's my presentation for now. Apologize for the quick pace, but here we are.
Thank you, Derek. We're falling a little behind schedule. I've been informed that we can reply to the questions and comments in the platform. So I'd like to bring up the play to win code word for this session. And the play to win code word is new. Please write it down and enter it during the break. We're going to be closing off this session, and we'll be rejoining at 1:55 p.m. for our next one. We'll see you soon.